So, you want to learn how to make a slingshot that is easy to make, uses cheap materials and minimal tools, and you can make in a relatively small amount of time, while still being a fairly nice slingshot. Well, you came to the wrong video. Today I'll be showing you how to make said slingshot, and it's surprising how easy it is. But yeah, I'll be using minimal tools to make a fairly nice slingshot that you can make in an afternoon, if that. So let's get into the video. I'll be using this piece of 11/16 plywood. It's not particularly nice plywood because you can see gaps in it in a few areas, like right there. There's a little hole in there, which means it wasn't spectacularly made. But it will work fine for this. I wouldn't recommend using anything under 1/2" plywood because there would definitely be some flex in that. 1/2" will work, but there will very likely be some flex in it. And I wouldn't use anything above 3/4 inch because that would be a little on the thick side and not very comfortable. But I'm just going to trace out the template of the slingshot and then cut out with a coping saw. A jigsaw would also work better, but I'm trying to use as basic tools as I can, so I'm just going to be using a coping saw. This is the design I'm going to be using. I don't really know what it's called. I've made a few slingshots out of this design and it's very comfortable for me. It may look really funky. I actually have it kind of backwards, but you hold it like that with your thumb going right there, and it's very, very comfy for me. You can really do any design you want at all. It's completely up to you, obviously. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out with a coping saw.
Artlist.io.
And there we go. So for this one, I'll just be holding it like this. It's very comfy. So now I'm just going to use a rasp and some files, I guess, as well to clean it up. Like this area, make it even here and all those. Just clean everything up. And one thing that's very important when you're working with plywood and when you're rasping is when you're on there, never rasp this way because that will tear away the layers. Always want to rasp this way or put a little bevel here first and then come that way, and then make sure you just don't hit a hard edge going this way with the rasp because it'll just mess up the plywood. And I'll give you a demonstration of that. Here's the piece, here's the rasp, and you go this way, you get that tear out. It looks all messy and it can get pretty nasty. It can also delaminate the wood a little bit. So you always want to go this way, or put a little bevel here like that, and then do this. Even then, it's still not great, but it works. And for all the shaping, I'm going to be using this rat tail rasp. I've had it for years, and for some reason, it's still ridiculously sharp. And this big Nicholson rasp that has two levels of aggressiveness. I know this thing isn't exactly minimalistic, but I don't have another good rasp that is smaller, but any flat rasp will work perfectly. This is just kind of the only thing I have that will work right now. Before I start doing any shaping, I'm going to be putting little bevels on there so I can shape it freely without having to worry about tear out. And that's basically what I'm going for, just clean it up so it looks more even and not all snotty like that. And on areas like this where it's a convex surface thingy, I just use the flat rasp. So I got that part finished, and you'll notice I didn't do the tops, and that's because those were already on a flattish edge, so I didn't really need to do those. The next step is to go ahead and round over all the edges where you're going to be gripping, so like all the way up to here on both sides and there, and that just makes it very comfy to hold. And you also don't stay away from sort of rounding that over like that a little bit. It makes it a lot more comfortable and it looks cooler, especially right there. looks something like that. You don't have to round it quite as much as I did, or you could go more if you wanted, but I'll just do the other side and over here. So this is what your rounded edges should look like. I like to round mine pretty far. Some people don't like to round them that much. I do, because I usually put fairly powerful bands on these. If you're doing a more symmetrical slingshot, one that was shaped more like very roughly like this, then you want to round those edges as well as up here and down there, kind of pretty much everywhere your hand is going to be in contact you want to round. So now I'm going to just do a little bit of rounding up there, like in around here, just to break that hard edge. I might even actually just do it with sandpaper. And then I'm also going to round down here a little bit, because for me, when I grip it like that, these fingers kind of come in contact right there, so I'm going to round that as well. And then you also want to round up here, pretty much everywhere up here a lot, because that's where the bands are going to be rubbing against, and the sharper the edge is, the more likely it is to cut it. So just round those over, and just continue to shape the slingshot. Just every once in a while, you just want to feel it in your hand. For me, this spot's a little high for my pinky, so I'll rasp that down, and just continually hold it like this, and feel where high spots need to be roughed down. And then when it feels comfortable, you can just go ahead and round these corners over, because that's where the bands are going to be. So if they rub against a hard edge, they're very likely to be cut or wear out a lot faster. So just round them over, just pretty much all these areas, and then I'll show you the next step. So now that most of the shaping is done, now is the part where we just go in and fill little cracks and voids. On this one of the disadvantages of not having spectacular plywood is that happens, so I gotta fill that with some epoxy. It's a pretty decent sized one. And there are a few other spots that I need to fill. So you can use super glue and sawdust. I prefer to use epoxy. You can use wood glue, but you want to mix it with some sawdust as well. And just go over it and fill all the little cracks and voids. So I'll just wait for that to dry, and then we'll carve the band grooves in. And those are basically just grooves around there that you wrap the rubber that will hold the slingshot on. And the grooves keep the bands on there more securely, and they also keep the rubber from sliding off. And since most of my rat tail rasp is a little too wide, I'm just going to use the narrow ends, because if the grooves were this wide, then the bands would still kind of slip around, and it would take up a ton of room up on the fork tip. So they were a little uneven. I made these band grooves a little lower than I meant to, so it looks a little uneven, but it's fine. It doesn't really matter that much. And the next step is the most boring part, which is sanding. I'm not going to go too high, probably to 220 grit, maybe 320, and I'm going to start at 80 grit. If you don't have sandpaper, this works totally fine. Just use a file or rasp to round over the edges, like under the band grooves and everything a little more. But I'm going to use some 80 grit sandpaper, and then probably 150, and then 220. And we'll see where we're at there, and then we'll put the oil on, and I'll show you how to make some bands real fast. Here it is at 80 grit. It looks pretty clean. 150 grit, and here it is at 220, and I think I'm going to take it up to 320 because it's not really that smooth yet. And here it is at 320, and I think I like that grit, so I'm going to go ahead and put some paste wax on it. And I'm just using some paste wax that is actually meant for chopping boards and serving boards. I think it works great for slingshots. It lasts a long time, and it puts a very nice shine on the slingshot. So while I let that dry, I'll make some bands. Now I already have a video about how to make some bands for slingshot, but that one was kind of long-winded and went pretty far in depth. So right now I'm just going to show you a quick version of it. I like to make my bands about 11 inches long, plus about 2 inches for tying it to the pouch and the slingshot itself. So I'm just going to mark it at roughly that, a little more. And then if you can, get hold of a sharp and non-chipped roller cutter, because mine is a little chipped, so it doesn't cut very well. And then I also like to make my bands about an inch thick. That seems to work best for me, usually a little more. So I'll just go ahead and mark that.
2,000 years later.
And now we can go ahead and cut it. So you just want to use the ruler as a straight edge. If you had a wooden one, that would probably be better, since there's a lot less chance of you accidentally running into the ruler and chipping it with because my ruler is aluminum or something like that. So just be careful and cut it as straight and cleanly as you can, because then it will last longer because there are less cracks and stuff. And then this is what happens when you don't have a clean cutting roller blade. So I'll just go back and cut out the band, I guess. So there's one band, and I'll just go ahead and do the same thing for the other one. And I also forgot to mention that you will need 2 little rubber strips for the bands, and then another 2 a little longer than these for attaching it to the slingshot itself. And these are basically just going to wrap around the bands, because they're going to be sort of doubled up in the pouch, kind of like that. So you'll just wrap the rubber strip around that, and then around them when they're onto the slingshot. So the next step is to prepare the rubber strip. Mine is about 3.5 inches long, a little more. Just about 3 inches or more will be fine. And I'm just gonna go ahead and round the corners. You don't have to, it just makes them look a little better. And then for cutting the holes in the pouch, if you had a hole punch, that would be really nice. Just cut them nice and evenly. But for those of you who just have a chisel or something, or a knife, this method works fine too. And you don't want to cut them too big either. Just cut the corner off. So you want to fold it up like this, like that. Just fold up twice, and then rock the chisel or knife or whatever, like that. And this is one of the parts where having a sharp chisel will be really nice. Just make sure you cut all the way through. And there you go. And then you kind of repeat it if you want the hole to be a little bigger. That should be perfect. And I'll just repeat that for the other side. There we go. Now we take the bands and we double them up like that and pass them through the holes in the pouch. Still doubled up like that, so you have about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch sticking out. Then you take your piece of rubber, and then before you do this, actually you want to get your needle nose pliers or pencil or whatever, so you don't have to walk around pinching it like this. And then you start wrapping it until you have about that much on there. So you take the rubber strip and then wrap it at least twice around the tip of the pencil. So you have it like that, and then you wrap it back around the pencil, so it's coming the opposite way that you wrapped it around the bands. And then you kind of hold it like that, and then you take the pencil and you tuck it with the rubber strip through and underneath the first 2. And there you go. And then you just trim off the extra, and if you ever want to take the bands off the pouch, you just pull that piece out and it comes out very easily. And then you just want to repeat that for the other side. And then if you want to do it with the pliers, you basically do the same thing up until the point where you're going to tuck the rubber strip behind it, and instead you just grab it in the pliers like that, and then you just pull it through. It's a little easier and more convenient than doing it with the pencil. So there is the finished band set, and you'll notice I made the pouch a little slimmer because for what I needed, it was a little bulky. So these bands should last a fair amount of time, and they shouldn't come off the pouch anytime soon. And then when you want to attach it to the fork tips, you just do the exact same thing. You just wrap it around the fork tips like that, and then do the exact same thing with a pencil or the needle nose pliers.
Artlist.io.
Overall, this is a really fun project you can make in an afternoon or less, and it will provide you with many hours of wrecking soda cans and the occasional window. I also highly recommend you try it, and if you feel like I've earned it, a like and a sub would be much appreciated.